Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, and welcome to a February wrap-up / rapid review video. So I say it that way because I technically already wrapped up half of February in one of my recent videos, which was my 2024 recent reads. I pretty much got through the first 2 weeks of February in that video, so I will put it up in the cards this way. I think it's this way. I think the cards are over here. I'll put it up in the cards so that you guys can check out what I think of all of those. I'll kind of like blow through what they were, but not really talk about them at all. And then move on to the second half of the month, and I'm trying to make this relatively quick, so I'm not going to talk super long about all of them. We're going to try and make them as rapid as possible. I say that a lot. It doesn't necessarily always come true. We'll see how it goes. So in the month of February, I read 12 books for a total of 4,878 pages. Of those, 5 of them were arcs, which is actually really good for me. I'm trying really hard to do better about reading all of the arcs that I have and catching up on all of that. That is a video to come. We'll talk about that later. But this month I did manage to get through 5 arcs, so without any further ado, let's talk about the books. Just for a quick little recap of what I talked about in my last video, I started off the month of February reading House of Flame and Shadow. Didn't really love it. You guys can go and look at my other video for what I thought, for my non-spoilery thoughts. I don't even know that it's going to be worth making a spoilery thoughts video, just because Anyway, we're not going to talk anymore about it. You guys can go and look at the other video. After that, I entered a couple of romance books just to try and cleanse my palate, so I read Priest by Sierra Simone. I didn't talk about this one in my last video because it was a reread, and I've already talked about my thoughts for Birthday Girl by Penelope Douglas, so I reread that. I loved it. Once again, that book is just so freaking good. If you love romance, definitely go and check that one out. I've talked about it before on my channel. Again, I think it was 5 stars. Then were a couple of arcs, which were These Deadly Prophecies by Andrea Tang and Nightbreaker by Coco Ma. And then last but not least, A Fellowship of Bakers and Magic by Jay Penner and Bride by Ali Hazelwood. Okay, so moving on into books that I haven't talked about yet. The very first one is Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies by Heather Fawcett, I think. I received an arc of this last year, and it was not my reading year. We've talked about that, which is fine. This is, honestly, it's delightful. So it follows, oh my god, I don't even remember her name. Oh my god, I'm an idiot. Not me having an existential crisis trying to remember the protagonist's name when it's literally in the title of the book. Emily Wilde, you follow Emily Wilde, as she tries to compile an encyclopedia of fairies. So she goes up to this wintry wonderland called, I think it's Losland. I'm butchering what the pronunciation is supposed to be, but it's essentially like Sweden, Finland, Norway, I don't know, up in the northern European area. And she's up there trying to learn about their kind of fae, because they're different than the kind of fae that she's used to in, I think London is kind of where she's technically from. She is a researcher, the fae are known, magic is accepted in this world, and she goes up there on her own to try and learn more and add more about the fae in this area to her encyclopedia, and she's writing a paper about them. Eventually, she is joined by fellow scholar / rival / best friend / research partner, Wendell Bambleby, and he comes up and is trying to help her work on her paper and keep her company. He's brought a couple of like grad students, and you just follow them as things happen and events unfold in this very tiny town in this mythical fictional version of like northern Sweden, kind of. It was so good. I gave it 5 stars. If you at all liked Marie Brennan's A Natural History of Dragons, you will definitely like Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. It doesn't involve dragons, obviously, but it does involve a version of the fae that is not romanticized, which is what we see a lot in most of today's like fantasy, especially in the romantasy era that like Book Talk and BookTube has brought us into. So this is not really that. They are definitely the fae of like myth, not the fae of Sarah J. Maas. Let's just call it what it is. It's really good. You don't have like a lot of the illustrations, but she approaches it from the exact same scientific like research aspect, and it's all you reading her entries into her logbook journal as she's going through this journey. It was fantastic. I desperately want to move on to Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherworlds, which is book 2, which again follows Emily Wilde and Wendell as I think they're moving on to, I want to say Austria. It's another country in Europe, and they are continuing their research elsewhere. I'm kind of vibing with this alternating a fantasy read with a romance read as kind of a palate cleanser, and so after I picked up Emily Wilde, I picked up Pick 6 by Maggie Rodden, and Pick 6 is a football sports romance. I do not remember the main characters' names, but I enjoyed it. What the fuck was it about, though? So this book, I don't remember what the protagonists' names are, I'm not going to lie to you, but you follow a woman who is recently divorced from a man who is a manager for a lot of sports stars, and his best friend is one of these sports stars. So he is the manager or agent or something for a defensive end on Seattle's pro football team. However, she and the husband are recently divorced because he was cheating on her nonstop and he's kind of an asshole. So she is running this charity event, and because they know the same people, she and the football player end up at the same event, and through events that happen, he ends up saving her from one of his teammates who is being a little bit too attentive, and it turns into this PR nightmare in which they then have to pretend that they are dating for the publicity, essentially, which doesn't go over very well with the ex-husband, but nobody cares about him because he's an asshole. And so their fake dating kind of turns into real dating, as they always do in these fake dating tropes that I really love so much. And it was just really, really cute. The best friend between, like, I thought it was going to be weird because technically her ex-husband and, like, her love interest, it was marketed as them being best friends, but they're not really. They were best friends once upon a time, but they've definitely drifted apart, and he didn't know what was going on with them prior to the divorce. And then he didn't even know that they were divorced, so clearly they're not that close. And so I think that really made that aspect of the story a little bit easy for me, or easier. But I ended up giving it 4 stars, and I definitely want to read the rest of the series. I will be moving on to it eventually. After I read that, I was fortunate enough to be sent an arc of Cheater by Karen Rose. You guys know I am a Karen Rose girly. I talk about her and her romantic suspense series nonstop on this channel. This is going to be no different because I have been fortunate enough to receive arcs of most of the books that she's come out with over the last several years, and as a big fan, I'm pretty excited about that. So this one is Cheater, and this is the second in the, I want to say, San Diego series, which is a little different for her because usually she's the one romance a book kind of romantic suspense author. This series is different because she's trying out a little bit of a slow burn. So I'll pop the cover of the first book up over here, but essentially you follow Sam Reeves, I think is his last name. He is a psychologist, and in the first book, I'm not going to tell you what happens in the second book, spoilers, but in the first book, he has a client who he is very concerned about the things that this client is saying, but he doesn't want to break the patient-doctor confidentiality and lose his license, but he's very concerned that this particular patient is going to hurt people. So he makes a call into the police department anonymously, and people start dying, as they do in Karen Rose books. People start dying, and the person that is put on the case is homicide detective Kit McKittrick, and she is trying to figure out who's murdering all of these people, and all of a sudden this phone call from an anonymous source arrives, and obviously that becomes suspect number 1. So she and Sam meet that way because they obviously tracked him down through his phone call because he's not very good at subterfuge, because that's really just not his thing. And the rest of the book ensues. I'm not going to talk about anymore, but they do not end up together in the first book, which is new for Karen Rose. So she's definitely moving this romance through the entirety of the series as opposed to just the one book like she usually does. Now, I don't know how I felt about that in the first book. I don't remember what I rated the first book as, but this one I think I gave 4 stars. I liked it more. I don't necessarily think that she's going to take any awards for the slow burn. Mariana Zapata is definitely the queen of slow burn and will always remain the queen of slow burn, but the second book in the series was definitely a lot better. The storyline was different, it was emotional, it really tugged on your heartstrings, and the underlying storyline of like adoptive and foster care is always just really, really heart-wrenching. Both of them are very heavily involved because Kit was a foster/adopted child herself. Sam is really, really heavily involved in like trying to provide psychological care to kids that are orphaned or in the foster system or need to go to shelters and things like that. So it was really, really good. Anytime anybody wants to read romantic suspense, Karen Rose is the first person that I recommend. After that was another arc that I managed to finish, and this is The New Camelot by Robin Schneider. Now, I've talked about this on my channel before. I posted that I was just going to start reading this on my Instagram stories because I love this Arthurian retelling. I love this entire series. This is the third book in the trilogy. It is the end of this particular Camelot series. I want to say it's like the Emery Merlin files or something like that. So the first book follows Emery Merlin. She is the daughter of the infamous Merlin and her brother. His name is Emmett. He is supposed to follow in his father's footsteps and travel to the castle to become the sorcerer's apprentice, I guess. Not to throw that movie's name in there, but he is to become the apprentice, like, castle wizard. But he sucks. Like, he doesn't want the responsibility, he's not very good at magic, he tried to do something, it blew back on him, he ended up unconscious, and Emery has to take his place so that they don't lose the job because they need the money. And so she travels to the castle. She actually is very good at magic, but she travels to the castle dressed as a boy, pretending to be her brother, and meets Arthur, who is working with the King's Wizard as well because he wants to learn about, like, herbology and potions and, like, all of that kind of stuff, that aspect of the magic. So they work side by side, and I don't want to talk about the rest of it, but if you're familiar with Arthur and the story of King Arthur at all, it hits a lot of those same beats. I've talked about this book previously in other videos, and I will try and link that down below or throw it up in the cards. It's one of my, honestly, favorite Arthurian retellings. It's just so lighthearted and fun. It's not serious. It doesn't take itself seriously. It's very anachronistic in a lot of the, like, turns of phrase that the author uses. It's not afraid of having, like, queer characters. Lance is gay. Lancelot is gay in this, and it's delightful. So it just kind of takes the story of King Arthur and turns it on its head in a really fun way, but still hits a lot of the same beats that we're all familiar with. The second book was a little hit or miss for me. It was definitely the weakest of the lot, but I know I gave the first like 4 or 5 stars, and I ended up giving this third book 4 stars as well, and as a whole, the trilogy was a really enjoyable read. The last book I want to talk about in this wrap-up, the last book that I finished in the month of February, was Hooked by Emily McIntyre. This is blown up all over Book Talk. This is a Peter Pan retelling dark romance situation in which Hook is the main protagonist. Okay. I ended up giving this 3 stars. That might be sacrilege in, like, the bookish community that has read this. I don't really love it. Wendy was obnoxious as hell to me. She was just so annoyingly innocent and young, which was how she was written to be, but it was just really annoying to read her character. She was so trusting, and it would just make me want to smack her across the face. And then conversely, Hook was kind of a terrible person in so many different ways, and they tried to excuse it as, like, his childhood trauma, which he had a lot of childhood trauma. I'm not like writing that off in any way. However, maybe dark romance, and I think this is dark romance light, but maybe dark romance is not for me because there were just some things that were done that I don't personally find forgivable that apparently Wendy really, really did. So it was fine. It was fine. Hook is obviously Captain Hook. Wendy's Wendy Darling. But in this case, she was Peter Pan's daughter. Tinkerbell was Tina Bell, and that was his, like, Peter's assistant or something. It was fine. I listened to it on audio. I think the narrators were really good. However, I don't think I'm going to continue on in this series. Okay, guys, that is it for the rest of the books that I read in the month of February. Like I said, I will have all of the stuff in the cards that I've talked about previously, and then everything that I talked about will be linked down below. Down in the description box, you're also going to see links to my Goodreads, my Twitter, and my Instagram in case you guys wanted to follow me on any of those. But that's it for me today, guys. Bye!